You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Just a couple of reminders before we get started with this week's show. If you guys have written us recently, either just through email or through the hazardground.com website, please check your spam folder. We've been responding to emails for the last week or so, and so we just want to make sure that you guys are receiving them and that our correspondence isn't going unnoticed. We certainly appreciate all the feedback, any questions and comments that you guys have, so keep them coming and we'll do everything we can to get back to you guys in a very timely manner. Don't forget to leave a rating and a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. We want to get those to 1,000. We're almost there as we continue to grow this show, grow this program. You guys are such a big part of it. But the more we can get reviews, doesn't have to be a lengthy one, doesn't necessarily have to be positive, although we'd love 5 stars from everybody. But as long as we continue to get those reviews, the show is going to continue to grow and we'll be pushed to the top of the line as far as new podcasts that are out there. So please keep the ratings and reviews coming. Don't forget to follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast. And finally, don't forget about our Amazon promotion. Go to our website, hazardground.com. Click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. Do all your normal Amazon shopping. We get a percentage of what you guys spend, and we donate it right back to some of the great charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. Once again, we certainly thank you guys for being a big part of this show. Now on to this week's episode. Joining us this week on the Hazard Ground Podcast is a former Navy lieutenant who was also an EOD technician. He had 2 deployments, one to Iraq, one to Afghanistan. He lost his eyesight in an explosion in Afghanistan in 2011. He went on to be a multiple-time medalist and gold medalist in the Paralympic Games. There is a book and a movie in production about his story. He is Bradley Snyder joining us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Brad, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. I'd like to bag on you for going to the Naval Academy, but I won't. As an Army guy, we'll leave those kind of discussions for later on in the show. But let's start at the top because, you know, it's interesting. We were talking before we started. You and I have some mutual connections through my time in Baltimore where you ended up training and going to Loyola. So I'm excited to hear about all this. But start back at the beginning and tell us how and why you got in the Navy.
Well, I'm of the generation where, I was in high school when the towers came down, and I am the descendant of the greatest generation. My grandfather, both of my grandfathers served in the Navy around the time of World War II. My maternal grandfather actually served in the Battle of Midway and others. He was a torpedoman in the Navy, dropping torpedoes out of aircraft at Japanese submarines and ships and things like that. And so I grew up sort of hearing those stories and looking up at photos of my grandparents up on the wall wearing their naval uniforms. And I think it just sort of crept into my DNA that was sort of where I was headed. And then to see something like to live something like 9/11 really codified that in my mind of knowing what I wanted to do was to, be a part of the service that's going to make sure that never happens again. And so that marked, the entirety of my service. I mean, I went to the Naval Academy and spent 4 years there, but when we showed up at the Naval Academy in 2000 I got there in 2002. Yeah, I got there in 2002. There was a machine gun at the front gate. There were sandbags around the whole front. If you've ever been to Annapolis, you walk right off of the bars of downtown and all of a sudden there's a big wall and it's the Naval Academy. At the front gate, seeing a Marine with a machine gun was a shocking thing for an 18-year-old. And
sure,
I knew, we're not just going to school here. We're getting ready for war. And so I spent 4 years there sort of itching to get out into the fleet as quickly as possible. And then I spent most of my time in Iraq and Afghanistan. You joke about making fun of me for naval service. While I wore a naval uniform, I ended up working for the Army for all 7 years.
Yeah, joint service is where we were at the entire time. Why the Naval Academy, though, as opposed to an enlistment? Or, I mean, did you know, was this in the works prior to 9/11? Is that what you always wanted to do?
Yeah, it was a sort of confluence of things. I sort of knew that I wanted to go into the military. All right, first I knew I wanted to go to college, and the opportunities or availability out there for me was I qualified for state scholarships to go to University of Florida if I wanted to. I'm from Florida, St. Pete. Or I could go either enlist or go to the Naval Academy. And so I was pursuing those three options in parallel. I'm really glad I didn't enlist because the recruiter had me sold on going to a submarine, and I'm glad I didn't do that. But the Naval Academy was an opportunity to get an education, to go to this remarkable place. I mean, anybody who's walked the grounds of Annapolis there's no way you can't just be impressed with the chapel and John Paul Jones's crypt and Rickover Hall and Nimitz Hall and Halsey Hall and all these different incredible buildings named after incredible servicemen. It was just a perfect place. And then, oh, by the way, it was one of very few Division I programs that were recruiting me to swim. So it was an opportunity to go to school, serve my country, and be a Division I collegiate athlete. And I thought, wow, it would be perfect. So that was my number one option. I was kind of ahead of the curve as far as how quickly I applied. I got in by Christmas of my senior year of high school, and it was sort of a done deal.
Okay. To that end, obviously swimming a big part of your life and the water a big part of your life. When you put that together with the Navy, the first thought that comes to people's mind probably is Navy SEALs. Was that ever a thought for you?
Yeah, I think it was for a while. They're pretty quick when you get there to the academy, the plebe summer thing where they shave your head and start yelling at you. Pretty quickly, they start asking you, well, what are you going to service select? What are you going to be when you leave the Naval Academy? And I thought, well, I don't know. I figured the military would tell me what they wanted me to do. So I was kind of, a lot of my friends came into the Naval Academy and were like, I've wanted to be a jet pilot since I was 3. And I wasn't like that. I love the movie Top Gun, but I had no interest in flying an airplane. Maybe being on a surface ship would be a cool deal. But pretty early on, I saw a kind of a subculture at the Naval Academy, these fellows with cauliflower ear and thick necks, and they were all wearing scuba bubbles, this little pin that said they had gone to scuba school. And that was the group of people who were all getting ready to go to SEAL training. And so I fell in with that group. I felt like I liked that group a lot. I spent 3 years at the Naval Academy thinking I wanted to be a SEAL. And I did all the requisite dumb stuff that you have to do, running around with the logs and the rafts and the push-ups and all that. And I think I had an epiphany my junior year and just said, a lot of the reason that I wanted to be a SEAL during that time of my life was just because I wanted to know if I was tough enough to do the hard thing. And I had to ask myself a hard question, like, well, is that a good reason to pick your career? And I started looking at what is the career pipeline of a SEAL and what's a career pipeline of an EOD officer. I first discovered EOD officers when I went to scuba school after my freshman year, and they told us it was the best kept secret in the Navy. You get to basically do all this really cool stuff. It's a very small community. We're very involved. It's a really neat mission set, but nobody even knows who we are. And I found that pretty intriguing. And I ended up liking the mission set a little bit more. I felt like I was better suited for just kind of this diverse mission set, floating around different groups. The EOD community works with basically all the battle space owners. We work with the infantry, we work with SF, we work with Navy Special Warfare, we work with everybody. And being able to float around and bring our really valuable skill set to the whole battle space was something that really attracted me and I felt like I would be good at. So I kind of made the shift my junior year of college away from wanting to be a SEAL and then wanting to be an EOD tech instead.
Yeah, I mean, the EOD community, and again, I was a branched and ordnance officer, and I was one of the 2 people who was in line during my officer basic course to go to EOD school, and I lost out to a guy who was much better than I was. He was a prior service E6. He just, he was better on test scores, better on everything. I was a regular second lieutenant. He had about 6 years of Army experience. But again, it's one of those things where it went to the right guy. So, but my point is that the EOD community, it really is special. It is a place that prior to the war on terror starting, nobody really knew about. Like it was, you had to really search it out and find it. Now, obviously, anybody who's deployed downrange knows how important, how critical EOD was. And obviously the nature of their work was something that I don't even know if EOD experts would have figured that they would have had to do for the better part of 20 years through the war on terror. No. So it certainly is a very unique and interesting field. So when you graduate from the Naval Academy, you're experienced, encapsulated in Annapolis was what? I mean, happy with it? I mean, obviously you were moving out, but what did it live up to the expectations you thought?
Oh, absolutely. But what's funny is you asked me that question now when I'm 35 and I've been through all this stuff. If you had asked me when I left the academy, I was in this big hurry to go to the fleet. I felt like while the academy experience was great, I struggled in school. My priorities were elsewhere. I was focused on swimming. I was focused on military stuff. I couldn't wait to deploy. I was reading all this military history and stuff, and that didn't really parallel with my engineering degree. So I didn't do that well in school. So it was always stressful. And I was pretty happy to leave that behind and go do what I wanted to do in the beginning, where I wanted to go to the academy to become a naval officer. And finally, I was so excited to wear my little butter bar and head out to the fleet. So I think at that point, I was just really forward-minded. I couldn't wait to start training, start deploying, and all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't until much later that I recognized that the academy is a really special place. And a lot of people like to knock it for whatever reason. But we really accomplish a remarkable thing there, taking, ruddy-cheeked, bushy-eyed, kids, just 18-year-old kids, you shape them into a naval officer who's capable of doing really remarkable things in the fleet. And you do that in 4 years, and you do it really quickly. And now I work there, and I see this transition every year where the kids who show up, they're afraid of getting yelled at, and they're afraid of the upperclassmen, and they're afraid to say goodbye to their parents. And I see this transition where just day after day, month after month, they end up being these remarkable people by the time that they graduate. And it's such a neat thing. And I've committed my life to try to figure out how to understand that transition and how the Naval Academy does it so well. And
you graduated from the Naval Academy when?
2006.
Oh, so you never saw Navy lose to Army?
No, well, yeah, that's something I've had to work through as an adult. I think 2002.
Yeah, 2002 to 2015, it ran off a streak of what I think was 12 or 13 in a row, and finally in 2016, Army and Jeff Monken took it back. So the rivalry is strong, to say the least. All right, so you graduate in 2006. Now, Afghanistan's kicked off, Iraq's kicked off. You're in the fleet. What happens next? Where do you go? What's your assignment?
Well, as excited as I was to leave the Naval Academy and go to the quote-unquote fleet, I spent another 13 months in training.
In EOD training, yeah.
Yeah, EOD school in the Panhandle of Florida, scuba school as well, also in the Panhandle of Florida. And then my first duty station was Charleston, South Carolina. We used to have a mobile unit down there. We no longer do in the EOD community. It moved up to Virginia Beach. But I had a cool opportunity to live downtown Charleston while we were doing another 8 months of very Iraq-specific training, sort of that traditional mission set that you're probably familiar with, the IED response on the freeways kind of thing. We get in that big transformer-looking vehicle, drive out to the freeway, and do a robot-style response. We did 8 months of training there, and then I deployed to Iraq. I hit an interesting spot in Iraq. I went there in the fall of 2008 into the spring of 2009, and I was in an area called Diwania, just south of Baghdad.
Yep, know it well.
Yep, and at that particular time, the surge had worked, and we were starting to kind of scale down our efforts. And while there was still relatively heavy fighting up in the north in Kirkuk and areas like that, Diwania was pretty
peaceful.
Yeah, exactly, peaceful. So we thought our mission set was that response type mission, but we really weren't getting a lot of calls. So to fill the idle time, we started scheduling a lot of training with the local Iraqi military and police. We kind of made our own work out there, and it was an interesting deployment. Definitely not the deployment we thought we were getting ready for, but I think it's a testament to what makes the military community so great is that they're not going to just sit there idle. They always make it better. The FOB got nicer when there was lesser activity. We did a lot of training with the Iraqis, and that was a really cool experience. And then I came home after 6 months and kind of like scratched my head thinking, well, I went to Iraq and back, and I didn't fire my weapon once, nor did anyone shoot at me. So that didn't feel like I had gone to combat, I guess.
No, it never does. But quickly, combat comes to you sometimes. So that first deployment out of the way, uneventful, as you had mentioned, obviously no casualties, I assume?
Yeah, no casualties. I think the worst we had was a couple headaches, but outside of that, nothing bad.
Did you get a chance to dismantle or be on the team that dismantles the first bomb while you were there?
No. And
really?
That's the really tough thing for an EOD tech. And actually, I think during that time period, there was a relatively small amount of people who had actually, because, the there was the work was distributed strangely, where there were a lot of people who did a lot of work, but there were also a lot of people who did almost nothing. And I felt during that deployment and afterward, I thought, well, we've missed it. We've missed the war. It's all over. And you remember this, like 2008, 2009, I feel like we had thought like, oh, we're winding down in Iraq. Afghanistan really wasn't much after 2003.
No.
We felt like everything was kind of winding down, and I was like, all right, well, we missed it. And to your point, this notion of like, I'm an EOD tech, I'm trained to dismantle explosives. And we did a couple real calls on that deployment and thought that we might find something, but it turned out that it was either a mortar tail sticking out of the ground or, we did a couple weapons caches, but no live IEDs. And that's kind of our bread and butter. So I left that deployment thinking, well, when am I going to get my street cred, I guess. And then everything shifted quite a bit for my second deployment. And it was the shift from 2009 to 2011 was a reversal of that, right? Like all of a sudden Afghanistan started to be more and more of a hot spot, and Iraq started to come undone again, a little bit slower than Afghanistan at that point, but obviously it got worse and worse.
Yeah. And, I was in Iraq for the closeout of all 2011, and it was, there was nothing going on. I mean, by that time, the announcement had been made that we were pulling out, and it was just for us, all of us who went there, I told my unit, we're going there to leave. What does that mean? We're going there to leave. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Once we get there, our only goal is to leave. So Iraq at that time was in a weird spot. You were very static, very defensive, not a lot of kinetic operations going on, sort of just sitting on a fob for a year, getting mortared and hoping it doesn't land in the wrong spot, which, again,
right.
You had no control over that. So some of that was futile in itself. But you get
right.
to Afghanistan for your second deployment, and kind of just describe, where did you go and what was, kind of the expectation when you got there?
Well, there was a nuanced shift in the mission set, and I was more of what we would call assault support. So instead of waiting in a room for someone, an infantry unit or a route clearance unit to come across something on the freeway, we were actually going out on assault missions with a special operations force. And so the mission set changes. It's more of a stumble upon if we go into a house or a building and there's either a booby trap or a cache or something along those lines. It's now my job to step in and either mitigate that hazard or advise the ground force commander on how to best protect the force and move around it or whatever else. So it's much faster paced. Obviously, the job changes where when I have a big bomb-proof truck and a robot and ropes and a bomb suit, I have a lot more tools to use to do my job safely. In the assault environment, I'm not going to strap a robot on my back. I really have, a pair of clippers and a knife, and that's about, the extent of what I have to mitigate explosive hazards. So it's a very different job, exciting, but risky, very risky at the same time. So it was, but that said, we got there and our more task-oriented job was we were working with Afghan commandos, to train them up, get them up to a point where they can do their own assaults and things like that. And so we were going on missions with them every couple days. And actually, I deployed in March or April of 2011. And it started off just like Iraq. Like there wasn't a whole lot going on. And there were blips of intelligence here and there. And there was a couple of these blue on or green on blue type of attacks where a commando would occasionally sort of turn on us. And that happened and we managed that. But by and large, there wasn't a lot of, we would go out into these villages, we would go on an assault, and I wouldn't find anything. I wouldn't find any weapons, wouldn't find any booby traps or anything. And I thought, man, it happened again. We missed it again. Here we are just kind of biding our time. And then about halfway in that deployment in the summer of 2011, we started dialing in on this area called the Panjwai Valley, and there was quite a bit of activity. I hesitate to call it, again, heavy fighting because the tactic at the time was the Taliban was engaging us from really far away with very small groups of people, and we determined that they were trying to push us into areas that were heavily laden with IEDs. And that managing that tactically became a huge challenge. It was really frustrating because, we're taking on massive amounts of risk with not a lot of reward. We're not really, fighting groups of people and there was no perception of winning. It was basically just trying to avoid getting hurt. So that got increasingly frustrating over the next couple months. And then obviously that's where I got hurt. We were on one of those missions. We were patrolling in an area. We had actually not taken contact at that point, but kind of expected that we would very soon. And we found ourselves in an area that was really heavily laden with IEDs. There were 2 Afghans in our patrol who stepped on one. I was in the effort to try to, medically evacuate those 2 casualties, where in so doing, I stepped on another IED that was about a meter away from the other one. And so it was just one of those days you hear, I feel bad for my partner, Adam, and then the medic. We had a PJ with us. They were running around with their heads cut off, trying to, take care of all these casualties. And, I didn't make it I made it better for a little while, and then I made it worse by getting hurt myself. So it was a really crappy day.
Yeah, you kind of got ahead of it there, but I'm just, all right. So this isn't your first experience with a bomb at this point in time, right?
Oh, yeah. So on that deployment, that's where, I was able to actually kind of do my job a number of times then.
Right.
It kind of, the mission started to kind of actually just escalate slowly. Like there would be a mission where we found an IED, but we didn't actually take contact. And then there was a mission where we took contact and found a bunch of IEDs. And there was a mission that was really complicated. It kind of just started to escalate slowly throughout that year. And from what I understand, it continued to go that way even after I had left. It ended up being a pretty straining deployment for my platoon and everyone who we were working with at that point. So the tides had turned, I guess.
When you take apart that first bomb, do you kind of have that smile on your face that goes, "Oh, this is what this is like"?
Not until afterward. I think what you don't hear about, or you probably do, but like as an EOD tech on an assault team, consider also basically a 2-year workup cycle, and then going out on a mission every 3 days. I think it was like our 15th or 16th mission when stuff started to happen. But every mission I go on, whether it's a training one or not, the ground force is trained just like anytime you see a wire, or anytime you see disturbed earth, or anytime you see a set of like a stack of rocks that looks weird, call EOD. I'd rather get called up 100 times and it all be false calls than miss one that was actually an explosive and lose somebody. So that happens like a lot of times throughout an assault, and it's a challenge for an EOD tech to run over and see that, no, this isn't a bomb. Nope, this isn't a bomb. Nope, this isn't a bomb. Nope, this isn't a bomb. That happens hundreds of times before it's real. And I remember the day that we were doing an assault. We were a split assault. So one group was coming up from the south. One group was coming in from the north. I was in the group from the north. I hear it come over the radio. Hey, we need EOD at, building 5 or whatever, which was way down on the south of this village. And I kind of came over the radio like, hey, I can't get there for a while. And, just stay away from it. And in my mind, I was like, it's nothing. It's another one of these stupid false calls. It's probably a football or something like that. And I remember walking up to the doorway and I saw the mortar tail sticking out of the ground. It was a football sized mortar where just a little part of the bulky side of the mortar was sticking out of the ground. And there was a wire running from the nose up into the doorway of a small building. And I was the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I got the goosebumps and was like, nope, this one's real. I looked back at the SEAL who was behind me, and he saw my eyes go wide, and he just backed up a little bit because he was expecting me to be like, no, it's nothing. But when he saw my eyes go wide,
he just slowly backs away, huh?
Yeah. And I didn't end up actually going hands-on or doing anything remarkable, and I just put a countercharge on it and blew it up. But there was the first time I had walked up on something, and this, but like the wire that's running to an unknown location is really the scariest thing in EOD because you don't know what's on the other side of that wire. Is it a RC device? Is it a cell phone? Is there a person in that building that's just waiting for me to walk up on it? The uncertainty is really kind of just gnaws at you. So, minimize your time on target. I put a charge down, walked away, blew it up, and it turned out I wasn't able. No, still to this day, I don't know what was on the other side of that wire because the building came down on top of it, and it wasn't worth us going through the debris. But You know, in the assault environment, I consider that a mitigated hazard because it's no longer an active bomb. So
I remember, you know, in my first deployment, you know, we would get these reports and they were all classified at the time. You know, before, you know, we'd always check the roads before we'd go out on them. You know, roads were green, yellow, red, or black, and the black ones you weren't supposed to go on at all. But we would always get these reports with pictures of IEDs, everything from soda cans to dead animals to dolls in the street. And it's just like, you know, you'd get these pictures of IEDs before they were exploded that they found them. And you're sitting here thinking, dude, I drove past 1,000 soda cans on the side of the road. You know, like, how am I ever supposed to know without stopping and standing on top of it what the hell it is? You know, I mean, how many times did you see a dead animal on the side of the road? How many times did you see a bunch of rocks on the side of the road? The idea that, you know, I'm supposed to stop my vehicle, you know, and where I'm going from point A to point B to get out and check this thing. One, it's necessary because you're probably saving the life of somebody else. But two, it's almost maniacal. It's like, you know, I mean, you're going to put yourself at that risk, and that's outside of your mission set to go do something that doesn't involve you accomplishing your mission. So it's a weird sort of situation that you guys get in. But I mean, again, I can recall multiple times, you know, we'd pull up on something and we would stop and then we'd call EOD and then we'd sit there for like hours because there were so few EOD techs available and there was so many calls going out to them. They were so overloaded. And this was, again, was before you even, you know, had commissioned, but in 05 to 06. But, you know, the point just simply being that the nature of that job is and the op tempo of it was something that was unlike any other job in the War on Terror. No.
Yeah. I remember giving my, you know, before every one of our missions in Afghanistan, you'd give a little brief, like a mission brief. And you know, there was always a EOD slide or two that had all the pictures that you just referred to. Here's what we're looking for. And I remember going through all the things. And it's like, you know, and also I'm trying not to just scare the crap out of everybody, but I'm trying to give them the information that they need. And then also giving them the tactical guidance, like, you know, where to stay away from. And I gave, the first time I looked at my slide, it was like, don't go on pathways because there's IEDs on pathways. Don't go in the great fields because there's IEDs in great fields. Don't go on rooftops because we've seen IEDs on rooftops. Anywhere that a helicopter's landed, there's probably going to be an IED there. I looked through my slide, and like at the end of the day, there was no safe area. Like they've been everywhere, you know. So you look at that, and I can't imagine what that feels like for a non-EOD tech. Like I'm armed with, I know what to do when I see the wire or the Christmas tree lights or whatever else. For everybody else, it's like, well, there's IEDs everywhere. What am I supposed to do, you know?
Prior to your injury, had you guys sustained any casualties from your team?
Thankfully, no Americans. We had lost two or three commandos, unfortunately, and it's tough in its own way. I think it's sucks to say it's worse when it's an American for us because it's someone you trained with and all that sort of stuff. But we work with the commandos as well, and while we weren't, you know, as tight with them as we were with the Americans, losing one of them was really gripping. And I remember sometimes it was frustrating for me to sort of impose tactical restraint on our group. I would say, you know, we don't want to patrol like this. We want to patrol like that because it's safer from an IED perspective. And some of the special operations folks I worked with were not fans of that because it really constrains their ability to maneuver. And so there was always this kind of locking horns about what's the most efficient tactical way to move about, managing the threat of how do we engage bad guy forces at the same time mitigating risk to IEDs. The first time that we lost a commando, it dramatically changed that conversation, and people started to understand what I was trying to say because it's an ugly thing. The post-blast environment's an ugly thing, and evacuating a casualty is a really sad thing, and especially hearing the news after you get back, because you don't know when you put them on the helicopter. Sometimes you think, well, he's still breathing at that point, but you get the news when you get back from the mission that guy's no longer with you, and it's like, man, that's rotten, and it changes the way, you know, every time that you do that head count onto the helicopter going out on a mission, you're counting every one of those people, and you're kind of thinking like, man, it'll be really rotten if one of these guys doesn't come back. And, you know, it's weird when I remember I would always do the count onto the helicopter with the team lead. And every time I'd pat a guy as he's getting on the helicopter, I'm thinking it's kind of my job. Part of my job is to make sure that these guys come back. And when one doesn't, it's a really, really awful feeling.
All right. You started to talk about September 7th, 2011. Let's try to get into it in more granular detail. As you get up that morning, Is it a normal day for you guys? Does everything seem normal? Does it feel normal?
Yeah, more or less. The mission set had changed just a little bit. We were on this sort of, instead of it being a singular mission, it was a part of a series of missions. That was a little bit different. But overall, we had been doing that style of mission over and over and over again for 6 months at that point. We felt as though we know what we're doing, and we have a good working dynamic with us and the commandos, and we know what we're contending with. We had some experience under our belts and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it felt normal. But like I said, every time that the helicopters land and you're getting ready to go out, it completely changes the way your brain works. You sort of click into this different mode. And you recognize that, your life is on the line at every moment, and so is everybody's. And this, the combat environment is a lot of boredom punctuated by these really brief moments of incredible activity and craziness, and then boredom. So the real challenge is to stay engaged when things seem like they're fine, because you never know when something's going to jump out and all of a sudden become a big problem. And I think that the mission started to unfold exactly like that. We were going into an area that we knew had a lot of IEDs, we knew had bad guys. We were actually looking for those bad guys so that we could do what we do to bad guys and all that stuff. And it started off very quiet. Like, we landed the helicopters, patrolled in the morning, ended up in a village that nobody was there. And, in the back of your mind, that everything's going smooth. Everything's fine. We haven't taken contact. We haven't found anything. But the longer that you're in that space, the more suspense starts to build, like something's going to happen. And I remember on the patrol, we normally patrol in half groups. So I would lead. We would, at this point in the deployment, because of the IEDs, an EOD tech was leading every patrol, and we were doing kind of like ducks in a row patrol, just to kind of keep everything safe. Very similar to the way you would have seen in like Forrest Gump. They have the engineer out in front with the metal detector. We were doing that with an EOD tech, myself or my buddy Adam. And we had come in two different groups into one particular village, and then we linked up in this one village and decided we would go in one big long group to another village. And my buddy Adam was leading this really long patrol. And on the way out of this town, I saw one of those little stacks of rocks. Like, stacks of rocks is this weird, it's an indication from locals to say, don't go down this area. So I called it out to the group, and I was already feeling bad about where we were. And then about 15 minutes later, a blast shot up at the front of our patrol. And I thought the worst. I thought my buddy Adam had stepped on something. So I ran up to the front of the patrol. I was pretty happy.
How much distance are we talking from where you are to, when you say one long line of patrol, how long are we talking?
Yeah, so we're a patrol like 30, 40 people. And so we're probably spread over the distance of a football field. We have pretty good space in between each guy. I'm about halfway back, so I'm probably 50 yards back from the front. But the terrain, it was Afghanistan in a valley with all these grape fields. So I was on like a path with a grape field to my left, and then there's these big tall walls, and that's where that's why I didn't feel good about where we were at. We had to go through this area that to the left and to the right, as far as you could see, was this about 10, 11 foot wall. And sometimes we'll scale that, but sometimes we'll say, well, let's just get everybody through quickly. And there was this one bombed out section of the wall, which allowed us to kind of go through. But every EOD tech hates areas like that. It's a choke point. It's a really easy place to put a booby trap, because people moving from one place to another kind of have to go through that area. So my buddy Adam had cleared through that area and had shown the patrol where to go. So Adam cleared through, and then 3 other SEALs came through on that spot. And then the first Afghan commando to come across that area, for whatever reason, decided he didn't want to go the way that Adam had cleared, and stepped out and around. And about the moment he stepped off the cleared path, he landed on a 40-pound IED. He was also really close to the guy behind him. So that guy got flung forward about 10 or 15 feet in a 40-pound blast. And then the guy behind him also was really badly injured. So we had 2 casualties that we were working through. and I was able to kind of figure that out after I got up to the front. And Adam and I were able to kind of communicate to each other. You kind of clear our tactic at the time was EOD needs to get in and clear space for the medic to do what the medic needs to do. Because again, that presumption is where there's one bomb, there's likely many, and we don't want the whole ground force running around in a minefield. So the advice at that point is the ground force stay still, and, take up a good security position, and EOD and the medics will sort of run the scene. So we were kind of doing that. We had a PJ up at the front, thankfully, who started to work with Adam to the one casualty, and I was working with the other. And it got really difficult because the terrain was really hard. The other commandos who were around the blast site were a little bit shell-shocked, and I would yell at them, like, come help me. And they, like, shook their head because they just saw their friend get blown up, and they were like, I'm not moving my feet. I'm not going anywhere near that blast hole. And so I had to wait for another buddy of mine to come up from the patrol so we could pick up the first guy. And your adrenaline is through the roof. It's hard to move somebody. You're worried about all these IEDs. You're trying to manage all these different safeties. It's just a really stressful situation. We were able to successfully get the first guy back, but it took us a long time. And I was getting increasingly anxious about how long we were sitting in one spot, because any bad guys in the area know, if they saw a blast plume go up, if there's an American force there, A, they know exactly where we are, and B, they know that we're probably stuck, because if we have a casualty, we can't move quickly. And then C, where there's casualties, there's likely going to be a helicopter, and every Taliban guy's fantasy is to shoot down a helicopter. So it's just a really bad situation, and your adrenaline's already pegged. It starts to increase moment by moment. And I was thinking, we need to get out of here quickly. So I grabbed a litter from the back of the patrol, and I was running it back up to the front where I knew Adam and the medic were with the second casualty. And I hit this little spot, and I remember the decision point. I could go around this one way and get to Adam, or I could go around this other way. And I was like, I'll run across the grass. I'll get there to him quicker on the grass. What are the chances that there's an IED that's been here so long that grass has grown on the top of it? And I thought, there's no way. And I remember distinctly making that choice. And then I ran across, and then boom, about halfway in between me and Adam, I stepped on another IED. It was a 40-pound blast.
Just for the audience real quick, a 40-pound blast, when you got to the first one, how big is the hole, just so they can understand, what a 40-pound blast is?
I'd say a hole is conical, right? So it's narrow at the bottom and it's big at the top. I'd say at the top, it's probably 2 meters wide.
Okay.
And then probably about a meter down as well. So if you were to stand down in that hole, it's probably up to your chest or so. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Sounds about right. Again, 2 meters, 6 feet, and a meter, 3 feet. So for those who aren't into the whole metric conversion and whatnot, but I just wanted to give people sort of a visual in their head. So when you think back to that decision, do you feel that you made the wrong one? Is it just, hey, that's combat? I mean, how do you kind of process that decision? You went to the grass as opposed to the other way.
It's an interesting question to ask. And for a long time, I felt like I had failed. Like, it was obviously the wrong choice. And we call that a mind strike situation. And we train that over and over and over again. I think it's kind of in my mind, it's sort of a worst case scenario for an EOD tech, because the scenario that is really our kind of bread and butter is, hey, there's a bomb over there and we need to get it out of the ground safely. And you have all this stuff at your disposal. You can evacuate the area, and you can take your time, and you can just send one guy down there with a little tool to do a one thing, whatever. In a mind strike environment, you don't have any of that at your disposal. You're trying to get a safe place, get a medic down to a casualty as quickly as possible, because if that guy's lost his leg, his femoral might be bleeding, and you have, anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes before he's basically toast. And so it's just this incredibly stressful situation, and a lot of safeties to maintain all at the same time. But we train that a lot. And the biggest thing that you train when you're in a mind strike is push all those feelings down, calm, slow it down, and move slow, and make good decisions, and move that metal detector back and forth in the right space, and make sure you're clearing left and clearing right, and not moving too fast. And that's exactly all the things I did wrong. I moved way too fast.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because when you said it, the first thought that came into my mind was what we learned, the very basic premise in clearing rooms. They say slow is smooth and smooth is fast. If you hadn't been running and had sort of just been walking briskly to sort of better assess the situation, do you think you would have made a different choice?
Yeah. I don't know. It's so hard to say. So that's where the other aspect of what you said comes in. It's like, it's really hard to beat yourself up over that because it's a real no shit crisis situation. And I always cringe at like the end of a basketball game where, Steph Curry goes up to the mic and he's like, oh yeah, we really put up with a lot of adversity out there tonight. And I'll be like, that's not really adversity. I mean, it was a basketball game. Like, this is a real, like, there are really significant consequences to literally every move you make in that environment. And there are people's lives that are on the line, literally. Like, it's just that there's no situation quite like that. And that particular situation caused me to I didn't handle it the way I could have. And, that's sucky to admit, but there are no situations like that. And I won't have to face a situation like that in the future. At least I hope I don't have to. Right. So there's no real point in like beating myself up over it. Right. But yeah, at the end of the day, I screwed it up. And,
but I don't know if you screwed it up because look, let me just say this much. Okay. There is a chance you could have gone the other way and had the same result.
For sure.
There's a chance you could have, if you had veered another 2 feet left onto the grass, you would have missed it completely. So I would just say the randomness of combat sometimes, and the chaos of combat and how it goes down. Literally, everybody understands all you can control is the information you had at the moment and the decision that you made. And to that, I asked the question if you felt like you made the wrong decision, not to sort of poke and prod at you, but just to kind of getting some perspective on how you think and how you feel about it. But I would tell you, I don't think you made the wrong decision. I think that you did the best with the information that you had. The result you have to live with. But again, I could tell you, you could have went the other way and a whole different set of circumstances could have unraveled that you couldn't have seen, predicted, or anything else. You could have gone that way and it could have caused somebody else to react differently and then created a whole different set of chaos. There is no way to figure out right and wrong. I asked the question just because I am curious how everybody deals with the decisions that they made, because ultimately that mental capacity and understanding and how you reconcile the decision decides what sort of mental state you're in. Well,
it's a great question, and it's something that was really hard for a while.
Sure, obviously.
And it was hard, leaving the battlefield is hard in a lot of different ways. In one, there's only 2 EOD techs in an assault force, and I left them in the middle of a really bad day with only 1 tech. They're all worried about their good friend. I made their day so much worse. And then I wasn't able to come back and help them at all. And that feels really crappy. And though, by the way, like to your point, it wasn't a mortar that came in and landed. It wasn't a gunshot or anything like that. It was an IED that was in the ground that I was trained to kind of avoid. So there was a certain level of responsibility there that I couldn't shake. But I worked through it. And to your point, like every one of us, I'm sure, has our kind of barroom story of how, I was right there, like 3 inches difference, and I would have been dead or whatever else. And if you look back at how many close calls we had all had on that deployment, there were a lot. And there were a lot of like high fives afterward, like, man, I can't believe we made it through that one. And the one I got blown up on was just a little bit closer to what could have been traumatic. Now, a way to work through reconciling it is that, look, I lived. I in many respects shouldn't have, or if I had been even 3 inches different in a different direction, I would have been in the middle of that crater as opposed to on the outside of it. And that could have killed me. It could have taken off my legs. It could have done a lot of different things. So I had to, work to absolve myself of the guilt or say, hey, it's okay. And focus on the fact that I was lucky to be alive. Now, a lot of that gets, I'll say this, one other aspect of that little pickle that doesn't often get talked about, and I think you're actually one of the first people to ever kind of like dial in on this, but one of the parts that makes that really tricky, especially when I started getting into Paralympics, I started to get a lot of attention, and I started doing some speaking, and I started going out, and people would kind of give me the sort of the hero worship treatment, like what a hero, and you're a war hero and a combat experience, and you did all this and you did all that, and we're so proud of you and thank you for your service and all of that stuff. And I had a hard time with that at the beginning because everyone was celebrating me for my greatest career failure. Like, I messed up. I got hurt. I'd failed to live up to my charter as a part of that platoon. I left them behind. And moreover, the rest of that platoon did their job the way they were supposed to, lived up to their training, didn't make any significant mistakes, and they all came home, and nobody knows who any of those people are. Nobody's thanking them for their service. Nobody's giving them a parade or giving them medals or giving them anything else. And that really frustrated me for a while. And the way that I put that away, and it's nice to say this in this forum, is to say, like, I understand now I represent that group. I represent my platoon. I represent my community. And I wear that. I wear that on my sleeve. And it has been really cathartic for me to kind of embrace that, because it has changed me. Decisions that I make in today's world reflect my community. Like, I know that, I wouldn't say certain things in the media because I reflect my community, and I wouldn't do certain things. I wouldn't put myself in irresponsible situations because I know if my name is etched across a really negative headline, it comes back on my community. And that's something that I take very seriously. So, while not everyone is throwing my buddy Adam or my buddy Nick or any of those guys a parade or thanking them for their service the way they are for me, my job is to stand out in the light for them and make sure that gets cast back to them in every way I can. Does that make sense?
Sure. No, absolutely. All right, let's back up for a moment. So
sure.
You step on the bomb. What are you feeling? What is happening? Take me through sort of the next critical moments.
I had the beginning of Saving Private Ryan where Tom Hanks comes up on the beach and there's that moment where everything slows down and he's sort of just looking at everything in slow motion. That's a real dynamic I think people have described. Something, it's either a cognizant thing, like there's too much in your brain, so your brain actually starts to perceive things in slow motion. That's how it happened for me. Like, I actually felt like time stopped. It straight stopped, and everything was quiet. There wasn't anything going on, and I had what I perceived to be like this infinitely long moment to sort of take an assessment of what had happened. And I remember like a really slow, very methodical set of thoughts. Whoa, that's what it feels like to get blown up, was the first thought. Second thought was, I looked down and I could see my legs and I could see my hands and I didn't see any blood or anything. And I thought, interesting. I wasn't affected. But then I was like, well, no, that's not right. I was in the blast. It didn't make sense to me that that I didn't see any injuries. I must be dead. I thought I must be dead. I stepped on the IED and I'm laying here and I must be dead. And so I started to think about, well, it's been a good ride. I've like,
to this point, things have been okay.
I'm on the way out now, and I lived a good life, I think, and in retrospect, there was some stuff I would have done differently, but overall, I think I did a good job, and I lived a life that I'm proud of, and I lived a part of this brotherhood. I had dedicated my life to service, and I'm sad I won't get to say goodbye to my family. And man, it's going to be rough for my mom to hear that news. But you know what? I think over time, she'll be able to be at peace with the life that I lived. And now I'm kind of excited to figure out what happens after you die. We talk about it, read books about it, but no one actually knows because anybody who can talk about it's dead. So
I'm waiting for the gates. Where are they?
Yeah, exactly. So I laid there kind of thinking like, all right, any moment now, some kind of white light or something. And I remember actually kind of getting like, wow, like what? It takes a long time for whatever's supposed to happen. And then all of a sudden, like...
I didn't realize you had to wait when you got to heaven.
Yeah, well, I was like, this is weird. Like, I'm waiting on Earth. Like, I would have thought that you'd just jump into some kind of hyperspace or something. I don't know. But anyway, I wear my radio in my left ear. So my left ear was fine. And I was laying actually on my left side. My right ear, I never have anything in. So I ruptured, that eardrum was torn to shreds. And all of a sudden I had that tinnitus, like this really bad ringing in my right ear. And that's the first thing that sort of pierced my reverie or whatever. And I thought, oh man. And then I remember behind the searing pain on my left, or excuse me, on my right ear, I could hear my buddy Adam calling to me. And I thought, I kind of like whooshed back to life at real speed and was like, oh shoot, I'm not dead. I'm still here. Adam's looking for me. Let me help him out. And all of a sudden I started to get afraid. I realized, crap, man, while my hands and feet are okay, I took 40 pounds to the face. I wonder what's wrong. And I started, I called to Adam and he got to me. And I remember asking him, how bad is it? And he grabbed me and he said, your face is pretty effed up, but the rest of you looks fine. Do you think you can stand up? And at that moment I was like, man, like the failure started to sit in and I was like, it's like being benched. I was like, I'm benched. Like I got to get up. I got to get out of here. I'm screwing over Adam and Kyle, the medic. I got to get up. I got to get out because, they're worried about the other guys. I need to get up. I'm on this helicopter. I need to get out of their way so that they can go on and continue the mission. And I remember thinking, like, I need to get up. So I got up. They helped me start to walk. I walked a little bit better step by step. We got to where the helicopter was going to come down. I remember this really ironic moment. I was standing there. They had cut all my shirt, my armor off and everything. So I'm standing there with no shirt on and just my combat pants. And I kind of thought there was this moment where I was like, this is probably a pretty funny image. I must look really messed up. My face is all torn up. My ball cap got blown off. I had pretty long hair at the time. So I was like, I looked at my buddy Juno, or where I thought Juno was. I wasn't seeing at the time. I looked over at Juno. I was like, hey, Juno, take a picture of me. And he was like, what? And I was like, take a picture of me. I was like, I want to see what I look like when I get back. And he was like, okay, man. And he took a picture of me and I got on the helicopter. And I remember thinking, like, I wonder how long I'll be out for. Like, I wonder how long this will take to get better from. And then I kind of went to sleep and that was it. And I never went back. And that picture's out there somewhere. I have no idea what it looks like, but I just remember I just used that to say, I never thought that I was blind. I never thought that I would be blind. It never really had occurred to me what this new reality is going to be like. You know what I mean?
So who was the first person that tells you that, hey, you're going to be blind, or we have to take your eyes, or whatever? How does that conversation go? Where are you?
It's not as acute as you might think, because I was in Walter Reed for a period of about 6 days. And during that 6 days, it's this really awful, like, extended LSD trip where I'm on all these painkillers, but my perception of reality is so messed up. Like, it's really weird to describe. Like, in speeches, I talk about, like, it felt like I was in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for 6 days. Like, everything's so weird. And there's all these voices coming from all these different places. A lot of them are strangers. Some of them are people I know, my mom and my brother and other people. But it's so hard to wrap your head around what's going on. But you are getting inputs from the real world, and you are hearing doctors say a bunch of things. And I remember hearing various things about my eyes. And so it wasn't like a far off reality when there was this final discussion where the doctors were talking about this last surgery that they were going to do to my eyes. And the acute part of it was, I asked, what are the chances I'll get my vision back? And they said, you have less than 1% chance of being able to perceive light and dark with your right eye. We're going to remove your left eye altogether. And I thought, whoa, like, that's not a great outlook. Like, if you say there's a 1% chance of rain, do you bring a raincoat? Absolutely not. Like, I'm not planning on this vision coming back. And it turned out that surgery wasn't a success. That 1% was even very optimistic. I came out of that surgery with a half of a right eye that doesn't work and no left eye. And looking back on that, though, I don't know that I would want the shadow vision or just this remnant ability to determine light and dark. I don't know how helpful that would be. I think it's kind of convenient that the lights went out and now I got to figure it out. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see anything. There's no more eyes. I have 4 good senses. Let's figure out how to use those senses. And that's how we started to move forward.
You just talked about kind of the idea of not wanting partial vision or partial light or partial whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, how much discussion goes into this decision, and, how much more information can the doctors tell you, and sort of why did you decide against the idea of, hey, maybe, my sight can come back, miraculous things can happen, so to speak?
Oh, well, I didn't decide it like beforehand. I mean, My mom could probably tell you more detail. I mean, my mom was there, and she was probably doing the talking to the doctor and making authorizations or no authorizations. Well, I was basically just like, cool, like, tell me what you're going to do. That's fine. And I did actually have to sign a couple things, I think. But I don't remember any kind of, I was not able to rationalize anything. They were basically saying the nitty gritty of it was my left eye was infected. They had to remove it no matter what. That was just you have to get that out. My right eye was a mess, but they had done some sort of sonogram, and they thought that they had found my retina in a small piece of tissue at the bottom of my eye, and they were going to try to unfold my retina and reattach it to the back of my eye, which, by the way, has never really successfully been done. Mm-hmm. So that 1% was based on, we're going to try this really weird thing that's not really ever worked, but, you know, in theory, it could work. So, and we're going to go to the depth of trying to find any vision for you, because that's our medical responsibility. And I was like, cool, good luck. And then afterward, it's like, nope, it didn't work. So now, you know, you said this back earlier in the podcast, like, we get pretty good at military people to say, you know, here are the facts, and here's the reality, and here's what I control, and here's what I don't control. And the fact was, no eyes. I can't see. And then your reaction to that is, well, there's a bunch of different ways you can react to that. And part of it's sad. Wow, that's going to suck. Like, that's not anything I had thought about. To be honest with you, I mean, I'd been in the EOD community for 7 years. I know friends who have lost legs. We actually deployed with a SEAL who had lost his leg on a previous deployment and came back. And I found that incredible. And I thought, well, if I lose a leg, I can still do X, Y, and Z. If I lose 2 legs, I can still do X, Y, and Z. I had met Sergeant Peachtree before, and he shook my hand with his prosthetic hand. And I thought, wow, that is really cool. I was aware of what missing limbs looked like and what those options were. And I really think in the back of my mind, I thought, if I ever get blown up, I'll either die or I'll come away with a missing limb. Blindness was not anything I had ever thought about.
Sure, yeah.
So it was tough at first. But then again, remember that a week prior to that moment of that final surgery, I laid on the battlefield in Afghanistan and reconciled my own death. And I was kind of okay with it. I was okay with that there would be no more days. But I was given this really amazing opportunity to come back, and I'm still alive. And yeah, I can't see what it looks like, but I have a pretty active imagination. And I knew that there were other blind people. You know, I knew about Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder, and I knew a blind guy had been to the top of Everest. And I thought, if a blind guy can go to the top of Everest, well, then I can surely do all the things that I want to do. Sure, it's not going to look the way that I had thought when I was younger, but I felt optimistic about the future, and it's really the feeling you have after a near-death experience. Like, I'm so grateful to be alive, and isn't this gravy? And honestly, after all the stresses of Afghanistan, there was a sense of relief. Like, there will never be a reality more harsh or more difficult than the reality I faced on deployment in Afghanistan. And there's a sense of relief there. Like, if I can tackle that, I can tackle just about anything. And a lot of people look at the story as, wow, it's so cool that you reconciled blindness. In my view, this is going to sound maybe really overly arrogant or whatever, but it's like, I didn't overcome blindness. Like, I overcame death. I came back from death. And that's a really empowering feeling, I think.
To that end, you talked about the view of the top of Mount Everest and everything else. The bottom of a pool is something you've seen before, and it kind of looks pretty similar in every pool that you've been in.
Yeah, so it's always a long black line.
So you've already seen that in transitioning. After you, and by all accounts, the recovery is pretty quick, right? I mean, like, they take your eyes and everything else works. And so it's like, okay, now it's just figuring out how to operate as a blind person. But you decide to get back in the pool, how and why, and eventually we end up in the Olympics. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I think in that early phase, so on the subject of like, so I felt this really empowered feeling to some extent. Yes, I was dismayed to not be able to see, and there were a lot of tactical challenges as far as finding what color shirt I had on and finding the food on my plate and that sort of stuff. But overwhelmingly, like, from a spiritual perspective, I felt almost empowered. Like, I am going to figure out this new world. And I had a kind of a bright light and a fire inside or whatever. But that was not the same for everybody. And I felt like I was making everybody sad. Like everyone would hug me and cry, and they would hug me and they would cry, and they would say, oh, this is just awful. And I can't believe this. And I don't know how you're going to do this. I don't know how you're going to do that. And I think there was a lot of pity out there in society, and I didn't like that. And I wanted a way to show people like how I felt inside. Like I'm going to be fine. Don't worry about me. And also in my previous life, you know, I was this sort of cocky special operator, right? I can do all kinds of things. I can jump out of aircraft. I can scuba dive. I can take bombs apart. I can do all this stuff. No one ever questioned my capability before. And now everybody can't even imagine what my life's going to be like. I don't want to be pitied. I don't want you to doubt me. I don't want you to, you know, reduce your expectation of me. I want to show you that I can be just the same as I was before. And I sort of had that chip on my shoulder, and I really desperately wanted a vehicle for that. And I was very grateful. Sports sort of fell in my lap. Mm-hmm. By 2011, or excuse me, by 2012, you know, we had a lot of support for wounded vets. And one of the things we had, I don't know if you recall this, Warrior Games was this big thing back then. It was a joint thing between the VA and the Olympic and Paralympic Committee, where we would bring service members out to Colorado Springs and introduce them to adaptive sports. Along with that, there were some random budgets. The Association of Blind Athletes actually had an ex-Army colonel, a guy named Rich Cardillo, his whole job was to just find blinded veterans and give them resources. And he was calling me left and right. Do you have any interest in shot put? Do you have any interest in biathlon? Do you have any interest in this? Do you have any interest in that? And at the beginning, I was like, no, I don't know why you keep asking me these weird questions. I'm not going to throw shot put. But after a while, I was like, you know what? I like his attitude. I like this, you know, maybe this is a good opportunity. And I started to get into that that space, and people started to get real excited about my capability. Someone was, you know, brash enough to say, do you realize how lucky you are to be injured in a Paralympic year? Because the London Paralympics were coming up, and like I was kind of, you know, situated in a place where it was feasible, if not probable, that I could make the team. And the excitement started to build, and I kind of saw this really rare opportunity to accomplish what I had set out. Like, I don't want people to pity me. I want to reframe this whole perspective. And instead of being looked upon with pity, maybe I can turn this into something else. And the Paralympics were exactly that.
So with that, do you immediately feel like, you know, you have a renewed sense of purpose, and, you know, you can refocus all this energy that you had and sort of, you know, get value back to what was lost by losing your eyesight in Afghanistan?
I would say not immediately. It all actually really happened so fast that it was like getting on a roller coaster, I think. Like, you know that this is going to be a cool thing, but you don't really know exactly what it's going to feel like until you get up to the top of that hill and the roller coaster drops, sort of thing. Like, the excitement just kept building throughout that year. And I really kind of thought, you know, this is going to be a nice thing to take advantage of. Yeah, it's a Paralympic year. Let me just do this 6 months of focus on going to London and doing whatever I can. And then I really got to get back to figuring out what kind of job I can do. And can I do Microsoft Excel and PowerPoint? And can I function in a workplace? I was actually an intern at a software company in Baltimore while I was training that summer. I worked at a company called Red Owl Analytics, started by a West Pointer, actually, Guy Filippelli, who kind of offered me a really cool opportunity. He knew the vet struggle, right? He knew what it would be like for a veteran to get out of the service. And, you know, I was really good at what I did in the military, but it's not always as apparent how that translates to the private sector. So he started a thing called the Commit Foundation. You may have run across them. And they reached out to me and offered me this internship. So I was really focused on, how am I going to make my millions in the business or in the private sector?
Sure.
And I thought, as soon as Paralympics is over, I'm going to go back into, you know, maybe I'll get my MBA or maybe something. I didn't recognize it for what it was going to be. And I think it was all the way until I was even in London, where, again, my eyes went wide and just like, wow, this is far more than I even could have imagined what it is. It's hard to describe until you've actually been to a Paralympics or an Olympic Games. It's a really remarkable thing. And, you know, every week, every month after that, this sort of new kind of career / opportunity started to build through London and into who I am now, I think.
You win 2 gold medals and a silver at the 2012 Paralympic Games in London. I got to ask you, compare the feeling of standing up on that medal stage, receiving a gold medal, to graduating from the Naval Academy in Annapolis.
Well, it's an interesting juxtaposition, I think. For me, graduating the academy, this feels funny to say because you are a part of the brigade and there's all this shipmate self type of stuff, but it felt like an individual accomplishment. Like, I wanted to go to the academy. I wanted to get my degree. I wanted to get my commission. It was a goal that I had, and it sort of represented the culmination of my individual track. And yeah, I wanted to get to the fleet, but graduating in the Naval Academy doesn't necessarily feel like you've done anything to serve society. It feels like an individual accomplishment. They call your name and you get this little plaque and whatever else. Mm-hmm. Winning a gold medal, weirdly, doesn't feel like that. Not to me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You're in an individual sport. You're really, like, there's no one pushing you or pulling you. Like, you swim 100 meters, it's just you doing it.
Yeah. And for I guess all the same reasons you would think that it's the same, but somehow it's not. Like, somehow, yeah, they call your name, and yeah, they put a medal on your neck and all that sort of stuff. But I feel like the individual part of that is so small. And immediately afterward, they play the anthem. And the idea of representing your country and knowing that in front of the world, and the world is there, 136 different countries or something like that participate in the Paralympic and Olympic Games, and they're all there, and there's billions of people watching on TV all around the world, and you are representing Team USA in front of that whole population. That's something big, you know, and you feel like such a small cog in the big thing that is Team USA, and that is our way of life and our flag. And it's really hard to describe, I think. And it's just the exact reverse. It's not the culmination of this individual achievement. It's feeling like you're a part, you did well for your community. And that's such a cool feeling.
3 more gold medals in the Rio Paralympic Games, all in total, a 7-time medalist, 5 gold, 2 silver. Which do you sort of appreciate or value hearing more? Is it Bradley Snyder, Navy EOD lieutenant, or Bradley Snyder, Paralympic gold medalist?
I've never been asked that before. I don't know. I think that they really go hand in hand. I wouldn't be one without the other. I think that I would have to say the military service component, for this reason, that Team USA is a remarkable thing. And Team USA reaches into our community in a way that the military in some ways doesn't. There are always going to be amazing athletes that represent Team USA. There's a whole, USA Swimming in and of itself has a foundation program of millions of kids who all swim during the summer and then swim high school. And, it's not going to be long before we find out who's the next Michael Phelps and all that sort of stuff. So I'm glad that I had my opportunity to sort of be a small chapter in that giant legacy. But they're well looked after in many ways. And I think anybody from Team USA looking at this, listening to this podcast will be like, whoa, we still need this, we still need that. But I don't think that they're looked after. And there's going to be another generation and another generation and another generation. I don't think, or I worry for the military community in today's society. There's these really heavy questions that are asked about what is the strain on an all-volunteer force? And what is the feeling for the warriors of our society in America when they represent such a small percentage of the overall population? I'm sure you've said this on the podcast, but less than 1% of the population of the United States serves active duty in the military. And you know this as well as I do. A very small percentage of those people, end up downrange, and a small percentage of those people end up encountering these major challenges. When we talk about the people who are afflicted by PTS and war injuries and rationalizing these really crazy things that we ask of our warriors to go down range and kill on our behalf. It's a strange situation, and it's a very small group of people. And I think there's a lot of dollars going towards that group of people, but I don't know that there's a lot of genuine, authentic appreciation or thought or innovation or, forward thinking on how to look after that group and ensure that they're set up for success. And so I worry for them. And I think it's important for me to continue to represent them, to call attention to that group of people, and to make sure that they're being served the way that they deserve.
I'm not surprised by the answer. I mean, honestly, to non-military folks, I would expect they would all think it's cooler to be a gold medalist, right? Because they can relate to that more. They've seen that more. But I mean, I could tell you just personally for me, I mean, I've held a lot of quote titles throughout my life, but Army officer still ranks at the top. I don't know that I've found a more fulfilling, rewarding experience in my life. I don't know that I've accomplished more. I don't know that I've done more. I don't know that I've been able to actually impact and change lives more in any other arena than that. So I'm not surprised by the answer. Again, if it took you a little while to get there, but I kind of felt like that's where you would go. So
I had to think about it. It's tough. And I'll say this too. I mean, to your point about, maybe you look at your own sort of set of accomplishments or titles and things like that, and you say, well, what stands out? But then I look at another aspect of it is like who you stand alongside. And again, Team USA is a remarkable group of people, but it's a special person who says that I see a problem and I want to go fix it, and I know I might die in the process. Mm-hmm. And that's okay with me. And anybody who's done that, I have immense respect for. And that's what it means to wear the uniform. That uniform says, I see a problem, and I want to put myself in between that problem and my community. And I know I might die as a result, and I'm okay with that. And that is a remarkable commitment to make. And again, something that we shouldn't take lightly, that we can't take lightly. And I don't know that we're adequately living up to our responsibility in that regard as a community serving that group of people. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's a story, yours is, that they probably should write a book or a movie about. And, well, it's coincidental that I said that. Obviously, I did my homework, but those things both happen or are in the works, right? I mean, where are we with all this? I know that the movie production, and this was a couple of years ago, I read that it had started, but, the book, the movie, where is everything?
The book is out.
The book's out, yeah.
The book is out, and we,
I started giving speeches. I started telling my story to some extent begrudgingly. I kind of thought at the beginning, like, who wants to hear my story? I don't know. There's a lot of other better stories out there, but I started speaking back in 2013, 2014. And I would tell my story. I'd answer questions. People would say, "You really ought to write a book. You really ought to write a book. You really ought to write a book." And I was like, "Oh no, nobody wants to hear my book." And then I started. And the big thing that I really wanted to do is I wanted to set the record straight. I wanted to write everything in there. It's kind of like a lot of people think that the story was overcoming blindness, but I told you earlier I don't think it's quite that simple. And I wanted to kind of get to that in a way that I couldn't in a keynote. You've given keynotes, I'm sure, and you only have 20 to 40 minutes to get across your point. And that seems like a long time, but it's really not. And I wanted to kind of set the record straight. And so we wrote that book. It came out right before the Paralympics in 2016. It's called Fire in My Eyes. And I'm proud of it. I think it's a great representation of that tale and a lot of the things I learned in that process. It was incredibly cathartic for me to write. It forced me to go back into all those memories and really sit in that memory. A lot of them are fun. Like, it's fun to talk about what it feels like to ride in a helicopter in Iraq. It's a cool deal. Some of them are not so fun. It's not so fun to go back into the hospital and think about what it felt like to be tripping out of my mind on painkillers or to be told that I wouldn't be able to see. But it was really helpful for me to go back into those memories and sit and think about it and to derive the meaning. So it released, and that came out in 2016. At the same time, we were kind of working on a film project, and that has stalled. It's just a tough space.
Yeah.
If you know any film folks who are interested in kicking that project back off,
No,
glad to talk
listen,
about it, but it's a pain in the ass.
I haven't said this much on the podcast, but a couple of our stories we've petitioned for films, and we've worked with some great people, and it is a tough road to hoe. And I'll say this much: the problem is that war movies of our generation are the westerns of our parents' and grandparents' generations. There's too many to count. And at this point, this isn't particular to you, Brad, but, sort of every war story has already been told in the eyes of Hollywood. The idea that it's you overcoming blindness or somebody else overcoming the loss of a leg or somebody else overcoming PTSD. We've all heard that story. So there's nothing new for Hollywood to get into this whole thing. And unless you find an angel investor who really wants this particular movie made and is going to bankroll it and pay the director and the studio and everything else, chances are you're going to be climbing up a very steep mountain.
Yeah, it's tough too. There's a lot of nuance to the story. And to your point about every story's been told, I think the first thing that a writer or a producer looks at when they look at the story is, oh, this is basically American Sniper.
Yep,
or
same
this
thing.
Is basically
they see it
Platoon.
The same thing.
Yep. And so not only do they try to tell the same story again, but they actually try to mold your story to that arc. And it creates an uncomfortable situation for you because it's like, well, that wasn't my life story. And well, now, like to that point about I represent this community, well, they're trying to make me into something I'm not so that they can sell the film, but that's uncomfortable for me. I don't represent myself that way or whatever. An example of this, and we got into this, the Navy SEAL pin and term represents a lot of market value. And I ran into this with the book. They really wanted to kind of label me that way. I'm like, I'm not a SEAL. And if it comes out that I'm trying to market myself that way, there are people, it's disrespectful. Yeah. And people are going to eat me alive. Like, that's not how I want to represent myself. It's disrespectful to that community. It's not who I am. And oh, by the way, it's disrespectful to my community.
It's stolen valor.
Exactly. And it's scary when you start to do a market project like that, because sometimes it gets out of your hands. I'm not in control of the marketing of certain things at certain times. And I think that's what's unnerving about both the kind of the books and the movies and especially especially in movies, the way they want to portray you in a script. The scripts they're caricatures. You don't have the time in a 120-minute movie to really show the full depth of who a person is. You kind of make them a caricature of themselves. And in the script writing process, I was uncomfortable with many of the caricatures of myself. And I was like, this is just not the story that needs to be told. And it's probably better not to tell a story than to tell a crappy version of this. You know what I mean?
I agree 100%. It's just one of those things where I feel like part of the reason we do this podcast is to tell stories that nobody's heard, right? To tell all the stories that nobody's had a chance to hear, because there are thousands of them and everybody's got a story to tell. Whoever took part in what we've done over the last 20 years, and even in some of the other, conflicts that we've chronicled here on the Hazard Ground, but again, stories that nobody's ever heard. So that was part of our desire from the outset of doing this whole thing. But when you try to translate that into movies that people can see and watch and Hollywood could market, it becomes a completely different scenario. All right,
exactly.
As we kind of put a bow on this thing here, where are you now? What are you doing? What's day-to-day life like? I mean, are you still training? I know the 2020 games have all been postponed. You were slated to go to Tokyo. What's happening next?
So, I am still training. I made the shift from swimming into triathlon after the 2016 games, and I started off kind of at the bottom of the rankings, and I've worked my way up into somewhere in between 5th and 9th, which is where I need to make the team for triathlon, which I'm really was set on doing. I was actually within 24 hours of kicking that season off when the world imploded with the virus. So we're in a holding pattern now. Very much intent to try to go to the games next year. So we'll see how that pans out. In the meantime, I'm excited to announce that I got married in November. So I'm living the dream with my new wife here in Annapolis, Maryland. I teach at the academy part-time, and then I've really fallen in love with that. So our new career endeavor is I'm going to head up to Princeton this fall to try to get a PhD so I can come back as a full-time professor here at the Naval Academy. And my goal there is twofold. One is to sort of look after our warrior population. I kind of brought that up earlier, where I want to ensure that we're asking the hard questions. Are we looking after that group who is tasked with this really incredible task. And then also not only look after our current warriors, but to train the next generation, to train the next generation of naval officers, leverage my experiences and make sure that the group that we graduate every year is ready for the challenges on the horizon and the tasks we ask of them. And then also I sit on the advisory board for the Navy Special Operations Foundation. So a foundation we kicked off a few years ago to support the EOD and the diver communities. There's all these, there's so many little niche communities and patch wearers within our community. And we found a gap that I don't think that there was anyone looking after directly the Navy EOD and the diver community. So we set up a foundation to ensure that that need is met, not only for our operators, but for their families as well. And we've done some good work in the last couple of years and looking to broaden that out. So that's where we're at.
All right, I got to ask you, because I'm not the only one thinking it who's listening. Did you know your wife before you had lost your eyesight?
No, I hadn't.
So you've never seen her?
Question. Never seen her. Yeah,
that's
I don't
awesome.
know what she looks like. Yeah, she's beautiful. She's a athletic blonde from Brooklyn, New York. Doesn't take shit from no one, and
there you go.
I really like that. Yeah, and we were actually set up by a mutual friend, so it was we kind of knew from date one. We were set up. We agreed to go to coffee because we kind of thought, well, if we don't like each other, we can just walk away. And we ended up having coffee for 3 hours. Then we went to Target to get a few things, and then we went to the grocery store. It was our first date. And it was basically like, I think we knew we would spend the rest of our lives together. So
that's awesome. Congratulations.
We're off to a good start. Thanks.
There you go. Not to pry too much kids in the future and all that?
Oh, yeah, probably. We're excited about this new adventure to go to Princeton. She's from Brooklyn, so to be near an hour away from family is going to be a new opportunity. And then I think we were kind of thinking that after the Paralympic Games would be a good opportunity to start a family, but we're going to kick that until next year and then have that conversation next year. You know what I mean?
Well, it is an amazing tale. Obviously, your spirit and your energy, I can just feel it. I can hear it in your voice, and the things that are ahead of you obviously weren't planned. You wouldn't have wrote them down this way when you left the Naval Academy, nor when you arrived in Afghanistan, but you've made the most of it, and certainly this continues to be a life that still has a lot of blessings in it there, Brad.
For sure. Thank you, sir. And I appreciate you saying that. And I'll throw out the point, like anybody who's done any level of mission planning knows that you can plan all day long, and I guarantee you it's not going to unfold the way you thought it was going to, and life's no different. So you just got to learn how to, planning's of course important, but you got to learn how to flex. And I'm really grateful that I've been able to do that. And I really am in a great spot. I start every day grateful to be here, grateful to be alive, grateful to be with my wife. And I think that's what you got to do. Despite all the challenges we face, just be grateful.
Well, to that end, Brad, again, I salute you. I certainly appreciate your time. You've been very honest and open with us, and I think that's a value to our audience. And just hearing your story and what you overcome certainly is inspirational, to say the least. But certainly, above all else, man, thank you for everything you've done, and thank you for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you for your service.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.